Welcome back, folks. This is the next lecture in our series of how to analyze the information that you're reading on the web for content, and also how to find sociology as you're reading. Now, we've been a long way already. We've almost covered everything on our list. In this particular lecture, there are really only a few things that I'd like to cover with you, and those are units of measurement, and then a couple of things that aren't on our list here, which are levels of analysis and something called the ecological fallacy. I'm going to cover all of these things in this brief lecture. Now, I've already talked in many of my lectures, and you've probably already read in your textbook about levels of analysis. They probably, however, weren't called levels of analysis. And really there are three in the field of sociology: the macro, the meso, and the micro. But for purposes of this class, we've cut out the middleman, so to speak, and we're really only going to talk about the macro and the micro level of analysis. And I want to talk about these two in chronological order. The macro level came about first. It's the first kind of sociological research we did. And the macro level really involves examining large social forces or structures of society and asking the question about how the structure shapes you. What are those social forces that are at play out there which cause you to conform or to choose not to conform? And how do those social institutions, such as the government, the institution of family, education, religion, etc., how do those social institutions influence us? So this is what we would call a big picture point of view. This level of analysis is talking about everything that presses down on you and causes you or encourages you to conform to the existing structure. And I'm going to give you an example here, and I use this example frequently in my classes. I ask my students, why do you go to college? And I get standard answers. I want to get an education, I want to get a college degree, I want to get a good job, I want to make money. Well, how about if I said to you, you're going to college because society said you should? You should think about that. Most of us internalize these macro level forces, these messages that we get about what's right or what's wrong, what's normal and what's not normal. And when we internalize them, we think of them in terms of our own ideas. And so we go to college in our society because it's expected of us. Yes, we might enjoy the process. But frankly, folks, if people said to you a high school degree was enough, you don't need to go to college, you probably wouldn't be in college. You would be graduating high school, getting that job, and starting your life. So a lot of the things that we do, while we think of them as personal choices, really aren't necessarily simply personal choices. They are part of the structure of society that has kind of been, quote unquote, dictated to us. It's an expectation that we're willing to fulfill, and we play the role. So this was the first way that sociologists tackled sociological research. They really wanted to find out how these big social forces influenced people, not just individuals, groups of people in society. For example, how does a distribution of wealth or income impact our social classes in different ways? How does access to health care have an impact on men or on women or on children? So you can see how this is not about the individual per se, it's about how the individual is impacted by what's already out there, those invisible forces. So you might be asking the question right about now, well, what about me? Don't I get to make some decisions that are my own decisions? And the answer to that would be yes, and it caused some conflict early on in the field of sociology that we were only looking at things in the realm of people conforming to structure. And so some of our sociological theorists started to think about things flipped around the other direction, and that gets us to our second level of analysis, the micro level. The micro level came about as a response to these kinds of problems with the macro level, where we couldn't really discuss the individual forcing change in the structure. And so this level is much more intimate. It examines small group interactions, and it asks the question how you shape the bigger picture. What is it that you can do in the interactions that you have with people every day to cause or create structural change? How do people influence the social institutions of our society? And the best example that I've come up with in the past few years is Mothers Against Drunk Driving and DUI laws. Mothers Against Drunk Driving started out as a few people who had lost children in drunk driving accidents. And those people got together and they started to figure out ways that they could try to influence law. And over time, that group grew bigger and more people joined, and they became more powerful. And as they became more powerful, they were able to lobby lawmakers to change our laws. This is an example of small group interactions pushing back against the structure and changing the bigger picture. Both of these levels, neither is right, neither is wrong. But as you start to do sociological research, you have to know which one of these levels of analysis you're working at. Are you collecting big data sets, and are you attempting to figure out how the structure is influencing individual behavior or small group interactions? Or are you looking at collecting data from a very small group of people in the hopes of figuring out whatever that group is doing, how they're interacting, is pushing back against the structure in an attempt to change it? That's the very first thing you have to know when you decide to do sociological research. First off, your level of analysis. The level of analysis does give us a clue then to our unit of measurement. What is the standard unit being measured? As we read sociological research, we should be able to figure this out. Are we looking at the individual here, which is the most common unit of measurement, one person? Now, that doesn't mean our research is about just one person, but we're talking about how individual behavior is playing itself out in that research. A family, a classroom, or a city could be the unit of measurement. We might concentrate in our research project on a subculture, such as people who bowl, or people who are religious versus people who are not. We're not talking about an individual here, we're talking about a group, and that group becomes our unit of measurement. Likewise, if we use states and compare states to each other, they are the unit of measurement. Or a country, that becomes a unit of measurement. When we compare, for example, the United States to France, the unit of measurement is at the country level. So level of analysis and unit of measurement can work kind of hand in hand. And when you think about your unit of measurement, it gives you a clue to your level of analysis, vice versa. When you think about your level of analysis, it should also clue you into your unit of measurement. There are endless possibilities for units of measurement, folks. It becomes second nature to put these things together properly in a research project. And remember, I have said to you before, none of us works in a vacuum. When we decide to do research, we want to discuss what we're doing, how we're doing it, why we're doing it with other sociologists, both experienced and not, so that we can get different perspectives about how we can do that research project accurately and how we might be able to do it even better. One other thing that I want to talk to you about in this lecture is what we call the ecological fallacy. You may have heard this saying, the sample size of one, right? And it often starts out in conversation with people. Well, I know somebody who, and then fill in the blank, or, hey, that's exactly what happened to me. It must be true then. Well, in the field of sociology, we have to be careful of the sample size of one. When we talk about sociological research, particularly when we're talking about macro-level sociological research, what we're usually talking about is research that can be generalized, meaning that I have identified a population frame. I have selected an appropriate random sample from my frame, and I have surveyed them or I have done research on them to find out answers to specific sociological questions. And they have responded back in a particular way. And now that they have responded that way, I can say that those results are generally going to be true for the people who live in that population frame. That's what generalizability is. There will always, however, be a person, when you're talking about sociological research, who will say, well, that can't be true because it wasn't my experience, or I know someone who did it exactly the opposite, so that can't be true at all. Beware the ecological fallacy, folks. Just because you have an example that you feel doesn't fit the aggregated data or the results of the aggregated data doesn't mean the data is false. It only means your experience doesn't match the data. That's all. Now, it's hard for us not to talk about things in terms of our own personal experience. And that's often the way that we think about the world in terms of how it impacts us and how we impact it. So just to be aware of the ecological fallacy, or the sample size of one, as you read sociological research. It may not apply to you, but one of the things that you need to investigate is whether or not the findings are generalizable. If they're not generalizable, you don't have anything to worry about. If they are generalizable, then you should maybe ask yourself the question, how am I different from the sample? How am I different from others in the population? That's a good quote-unquote food for thought kind of question to ask yourself. So again, generalizing your findings from a sample size of 1 is not acceptable under any circumstances. Likewise, vice versa, we don't want to assume that just because findings are generalized that everybody is going to feel the same way or have the same result or same answer to a question. All right, quick, brief little lecture this time. Move on now to your article analysis and see if you can pick out some of these components. Let me know, as usual, if you have any questions by posting on your discussion board or by emailing me. Take care. Bye-bye.